Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with another episode of The Casual Author. Today is Monday, February 19th, 2024, as I record this, and this is episode number 107 of the podcast. Today we're talking about the importance of self with B.A. McRae. We talk about celebration, how it's important to take a moment after you do something amazing to soak it in and celebrate yourself, as well as just recognizing the importance of taking time for yourself and how that adds to your creativity rather than detracting from it. So, this is a really good conversation for myself. Being someone who doesn't know how to pause and celebrate something, I mean, how often have I finished a book and thought, all right, what's next? And they just move on. So, it's a really healthy conversation and hopefully you'll be able to learn a lot from it. I know that I did. B.A. McRae is a very positive person. So, as you may have noticed, I did not have an episode last week, and that was primarily because of my mind being consumed with the conference that I was going to. So I talked about this a couple weeks ago, that I was going to LTUE, Life, the Universe, and Everything in Provo, Utah, and that I had a vendor table there. So not only was this my first conference ever, writing conference, I've been to work conferences, but that's just a whole different ball game. My first writing conference ever. It was also my first time selling my books in person. So lots of firsts, and you can imagine I was overthinking everything. Naturally, everything didn't go perfect, but it was a great time. I got to meet some authors in person that I'd been wanting to meet for a long time. I shared a table with someone from my writers group. It was a blast to get to know him, talk to him, and meet the other members of the group. It was just also a good practice for me to be able to talk about my books in person, which admittedly I've never had to do a lot, save for in conversations digitally with people, maybe via lives on TikTok and or other podcast episodes I've joined. So it was definitely different. I really enjoyed the process to a point. I will say that I was exhausted beyond all belief, and I think I didn't consider how I work from home. I do talk to people digitally all the time, constantly on podcasts with people, but it's more one-on-one. The sheer amount of noise in the conference was something I was ill prepared for because, I was just sensory overloaded, but I was tired by the morning of the second day. But, I pushed through, just kept doing it, kept doing it. I'm unsure if I did a great job explaining my books to people, but, I had some sales, made a lot of author connections. So I think I want to continue going to the conference every year. I may or may not have a vendor table. I'm unsure. I think I need to have a more practice around vendoring, maybe in smaller settings or in more dedicated sales settings. That conference had a lot of authors, and I know a lot of them weren't seeking to purchase. So, but like I said, made a lot of connections, was definitely worth it. That is now off my mind, which is great. And I feel like I can get back into the rest of life. I also haven't written in just a bit because of all the preparations and my mind being consumed with all the logistics of that. So, haven't made a lot of progress on writing, but I'm not too worried about that because I made some other progress. There was a brief moment during the conference, which was so amazing that my website broke. That was fun. DNS settings in websites is very tricky, unnecessarily tricky in my opinion, but I got it all sorted out. So my website's working and I updated the store. So I talked about honestly 3 or 4 weeks ago about adding the Kids of Cyber City signed paperback books to my shop. I learned at that time that my shop user experience was just awful. I figured I needed to do something else. So I actually set up a dedicated shop external to my website and linked it to my website. So now if you go to dankenner.com/store, it'll it'll send you to my new shop. So I think hopefully it's a better experience for you. You can see the products a little bit better. It's easier to maneuver through it. The mobile experience still isn't my favorite. I need to tweak that just a little bit, but desktop is much better, and the mobile is better than it was before. So hopefully you find that. If you're hoping to get signed copies of my books, they are all up. Once again, dankenner.com/store. Another update is I finally set up a new email. So in the past, you may have heard that I was using a Gmail account for my author. You're still welcome to email me at that. But if you're hoping to get in touch with me, you can now email me at dan@dankenner.com. I may or may not add a dan@thecasualauthor.com email alias. It's not there yet, but I definitely need to get that all set up. Something that I've needed to do for years, literally years. And Just haven't had the mind to do it. When you're sitting at a conference during the quiet moments, there's a lot you can learn. So fixing my website, setting up the email address, during those quiet times, it was nice to get some of the more technical things done, which I wouldn't likely have done outside because I'd rather be writing and when I'm in a different setting. So it taught me about the importance of mindset in the different times of day and when to use things, when to use different blocks of time for different things. So that was fun. Now, in terms of homesteading, there hasn't been a lot of updates other than we are overrun in eggs. I think we probably have near 100 eggs sitting up on our counter, which no complaints, but now we do need to get into the preservation stage because we aren't keeping up on them as well as we were prior to now. Good problem to have. More than likely, we'll give some eggs away to our neighbors because why not? Eggs are great. People like eggs. But yeah, we need to get back into the water glassing, make them shelf stable so that we can build up eggs for next winter. That's what we're going to be starting to do. Probably not this week. My son has an archery competition in a couple days, so I'm going back down to Utah, uh, with him for the archery competition, and that should be fun. Let's see. Other homestead updates. We did move the buck and his weather friend in with the does. They're all pregnant anyway, so it doesn't really matter that they're together. We kept them separate to avoid, smell crossover. But when I was out of town, and when I'm out of town again, it's easier for my wife to take care of the animals and the kids when there's not two sets of goats separately. So you just have to bring them one thing of water, a bunch of food, and you don't have to go back and forth to different pens to feed the goats and chickens. So that is more to simplify it. The weather is warming up quite a bit. We are planning for our garden. Obviously, this year we're gonna have to take things a little bit slowly because my wife is pregnant. She's due to have a baby in July. I've mentioned that before. So we can't get overly crazy with what we do on the homestead because we'll have a brand new baby. And obviously, you don't know when babies are born. So yeah, we'll have some amount of homestead. I don't think we'll go as big as we did last year, just for the sake of giving ourselves some allowances to, you know, spend time with the baby and for her to recover and everything. Um, so yeah, no, other than that, I am having a battle with little teeny birds. It was the magpies. Prior to now, the magpies have left the chicken food alone, and an entire flock of little teeny birds, probably 20 or 30, has moved in and they know where I put the chicken food. We've managed to avoid this for years and years, and they found it. Now, our chickens are laying eggs, so more than likely they're getting enough food. We provide other supplemental feed via our food scraps and, garden scraps from last year that have either gone a little bit bad or we grew a lot of pumpkins dedicated for the chickens because they do like the pumpkins. So they're getting enough food, but it's a little bit frustrating when you put the food in and you disappear for a few minutes and you come back and there's literally 30 little teeny birds that scatter when they see you. They panic because they're eating the chicken's food. Now, our chickens aren't going to fight them off because birds are birds, right? They're just kind of friends with each other. They just coexist. Now, there's not much I can do to keep the little birds away because they are very, very tiny. They're much bigger than chickens, so they will always be able to use the chicken door. I tried to minimize their entry points into where I put the food, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because they'll just fly in through the chicken door. But that is what it is. Nothing I can do. Just grateful that we're getting eggs, and hopefully the chickens continue to get as much feed as they need. That was unintentionally rhymy, but we're gonna leave it. Other than that, yeah, I don't think there are any other updates. Just glad to be home, glad to be getting back into the normal schedule. I thrive off of normal schedules, so it's nice to get back into it. And yeah, I think that being said, we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with BA McRae. Hey, Bria, how are you today?
Hey Dan, I'm good. How are you?
Doing very, very well. I'm excited to hear more about you and your story and your publishing journey. Everybody has so many different experiences, and I love to hear it. So how long have you been writing and publishing?
Ooh, oh, what a question. So I started writing when I was 12. I
Okay.
got super immersed into it around that coming of age time period. And I got serious about publishing my first book just out of high school, kind of the summer after high school. I was putting my little poetry manuscript together, and I officially published it in 2016.
Okay. So that's awesome. I love to hear people saying that they've been writing for a long time because I was not that person. I was
I
not that
remember,
kid writing stories.
yeah, which this is also super interesting too, because I'm sure that storyteller side of you was always in you, like
Hmm.
somehow with kind of medium.
Oh
But
yeah. Well, I was telling stories. I was just not writing them down. So part of my non-writing was that I just, and I still feel this way, that I don't feel very eloquent with my words. I don't feel like I'm a very good like prose writer. And so, I was creating stories daily, as a kid playing with toys and action figures. I didn't play the way normal kids did. I created stories in my head. Um, but I was just like, yeah, I'll never write a book because it's just, I'm not good with words. So
oh,
finally, when I was 28, someone was just like, you just need to do it. Just sit down and write. And I haven't been able to stop. So kind
and
of
we're glad.
crazy how that happens. Well, I hope so. Excuse me, someone must like it. At least I would hope. So
Yeah.
for you, what genre do you generally write in for the most part?
Generally, I would say contemporary, new adult, and young adult fiction. I've since recently kind of dabbled in low fantasy, and that's been fun.
Genre shifts are always so interesting. So, we
Mhm.
did talk briefly about this before, but just for the listeners, what prompted that shift into low fantasy?
Right. So my writer friend, Monroe Wild Rose, amazing indie author who does fantasy books, she really inspired me to take a leap outside of my writing comfort zone because I think I might have said to her, or she asked me to be a part of her fantasy anthology, and I said like, Monroe, there's no way, like I can't step into this genre because I had never really read fantasy outside of her books. And she's very good at giving you a very loving push. So, and I think I needed that because I am excited to further explore the low fantasy genre in the future. And I really enjoyed writing this story.
I think, the fact that you enjoyed it is a testament that maybe you should be writing more of it,
Mm,
right? Because
right.
some people, they may try to make a genre shift and it's not as easy as they think it will be.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm recovering from COVID, so you have to
Oh,
bear with me. I mean, it's all good. It's the reality of life. But so contemporary fiction. I'm not as well versed. I don't read a lot of it. But where do you draw your inspiration for stories like that? If you don't mind me asking.
no, that's a great question. I think that everyday life really inspires me. I like the nuances and making mundane things kind of interesting and almost romanticizing everyday life, I think is what really fuels my writing. And I don't know, just the complexities of inner dialogue and making the most out of life kind of things.
I really like that. It's a very interesting take on it. I would struggle to not add some element of magic to it. So
Because that takes a lot of work.
yeah, well, I mean, I think perspective, right? For some reason, the research behind contemporary fiction or, anything that would require significant research feels like a lot of work to me. It's like, oh, I could just make stuff up. I do some research. I'm not saying I don't, but you know, you have to
Yeah,
study the laws and politics of various places, have it in a modern setting. It's just like seems like a lot to me, but perspective, right?
yeah, tomato, tomato, right.
Indeed, very good. So for this low fantasy book that you've published or that you've written, I don't know if you've published it, right? You've at least written
Not
it.
Yeah, not quite yet. I finished writing it maybe 2 weeks ago, so I'm going to be diving into revisions soon.
Bless you. That's all I can say. I I am currently sitting on three fully completed first drafts that I'm afraid to get to revisions. I'm just sitting on the
Honestly,
side, feeling like, yeah, I'll come back to those later. Maybe I'll just write something new. I'm not. The revision process
I'll
is,
keep going.
but if you like it, do you enjoy the revision process? Is that something you enjoy?
Um, enjoy is an interesting word, and I would say that I do kind of enjoy part of it as kind of shifting your perspective of going into it as a reader, so you
Mhm.
can kind of reread. I don't know. I think you might have said this in one of your podcast episodes, but sometimes we go back and you're like, oh, I don't remember writing that. So that's what the revision process is to me. So it's almost like I'm getting to read a book that's catered to me since I wrote it, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. No, it's a perspective. I
Mhm.
very rarely remember what I actually wrote, which my wife does not understand. She's like, I just don't get that. I'm like, when you write hundreds of thousands of words, it's like I don't remember what I wrote 2 years
Yeah,
ago. But it can be quite fun to discover that.
yeah.
Are you like myself pleased constantly when you go back and revise some of your work?
I am. I do enjoy. I think that it's a little difficult for me to say like I'm a good writer and these things I've gotten better at it. But I do enjoy going back and reading what I wrote, and I think I've come a long way in my writer journey, and it's nice to see that progression, especially from chapter one going to like the last chapter in the book.
So I wanna talk a little bit about what you just said there because I think it's a very important concept. The
Mhm.
idea of not feeling confident that you can say that I'm a good writer, that I'm improved. So
Yeah.
that's hard, right? That's a very challenging feeling. How do you deal with that when you're going through and revising
Yes,
your work?
the ever shadow of imposter syndrome, right?
Hmm.
Right. I think it's a lot of self-talk that you need to practice. Um, so I don't know, just saying like, my writing brings me joy and I have come a long way, just kind of giving yourself some good messages and also just seeing how far you've come, looking at your own personal journey and trying to write for yourself first, I think is a good step.
That's the idea of self-talk is important. I mean, I talk to myself anyway, let's be honest, right? But
All right.
that's an interesting concept. I mean, I like what you said around it's almost like positive energies. The messages you give to yourself are, self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mhm.
Is one way to say that. So, what if what if you're feeling particularly down because of external feedback? You know, maybe you've had bad reviews on past books, or maybe your editor, nothing against editors, maybe the editor came back and tons of red pen comments. What do you recommend? Does this positive self-talk help through that, or do you have other I guess strategies to help you feel confident and keep working through the slog?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that sometimes when we get knocked down, it's really hard to enforce the those tools that we have because when you're in the fog of being in a funk, you're like, I don't want to hear that right now. I don't
Hmm.
want to deal with that. So I think for me, if I'm in kind of like a low point creatively, I might try to do something cozy to kind of build myself back up to that point where I can be like, you know what, that was really hard, but I'm ready now. I can go back. So kind of giving yourself a reset, I think helps me.
I love this idea. Can you give a specific example? I'm genuinely curious to know what do something cozy means.
Right. Yeah. So I think I have several different avenues that I go down. I would say my go-to might be playing Sims 4 on the
Okay.
couch on my laptop, or I'm always rewatching the show Monk because it's very like comfortable to me.
Hmm.
uh, yeah, just watching things that are familiar to me or having a podcast on. I like to punch needle as well. That's a pretty therapeutic hobby of mine.
That sounds therapeutic.
Yeah,
I,
punching fabric.
I've never done that, but it sounds just the motions of it seem like it would be
Yeah,
very
it's very good.
calming.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned watching Monk again because I do, and it's these things that you forget about. But the idea of these comfort things, reading certain series or books, I love to reread. And so I just
Yeah.
hold them when I'm just like, oh, I need some additional inspiration or motivation. I'm just going to reread this book for the fifth time or something, or listen to it via audio or something. So, I mean, that's an interesting point because stepping away can be hard, particularly when there's this culture of rush, 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 right? in self-publishing in particular. I mean, I think there's a feeling in traditional publishing as well, but in self-publishing, the constant mantra is write the next book, write the next book, write the next book, right?
Mhm.
So how do you slow down? Is it easy for you to slow down, or do you find yourself sometimes struggling to slow down and take a break?
I do find it hard to slow down because of like that outside force of, like you said, the rush of like, okay, now it's time for the next book. I try to take time to celebrate achievements, big and small, because it's important to fuel yourself and recognize, like, yeah, I just wrote a book. I deserve to bask in this glow for a minute. So after I finished writing my low fantasy, The Locals is the title. I took like 2 weeks to just kind of like chill out a little bit and, like I said, bask in that glow of like, okay, I just wrote a book and that was really cool, and okay, now it's time to get to work. But I do find that I overload myself with projects, writing and outside of that, and that's something I'm working on, wanting to slow down a little bit.
I'm laughing because I'm the same way in terms of projects. But,
Yeah.
this idea of celebration, I want to double click on that a little bit because I literally finished a book like 2 days ago. And I'm
Really?
already like, oh, what's next? Should I start? I should just start writing the next one, right?
Yeah, congratulations. That's
But
amazing.
thank you. It's hard. I'm not great at talking about these things just because it's just like, I don't know. I'm not great. Celebration is something that I've never been great at my entire
Mhm.
life. Myself, I can celebrate other people all day, but when it comes to myself, it's like, I don't really know. Like it feels weird to me, which is dumb because it shouldn't feel weird to me. But it seems like you're very comfortable, which is good, with the rewarding yourself, celebration. Is that something you had to exercise, or is that you just naturally good at that because you're a positive person?
Oh, thank you for saying I'm a positive person. That's something
I mean, you just seem like a very positive person. So,
thank you. I think it's something that I had to kind of work on and
mm,
build up, especially with recognizing my own accomplishments. Because I grew up being a very timid person, very shy, and not being able to own up, like, yeah, I did this, and kind of self promotion. I'm also somebody who thrives off of positive reinforcement. So I think telling, my husband, like, I just finished a book, and him telling me, like, let's celebrate, gives me that fuel of like, wow, I'm doing good. I've got this. So it's been a practice.
okay, that's comforting because, that's the fun thing about social media and podcasts is it's so easy. I mean, because we're all obviously we want to sound professional, we want to sound like good people, but sometimes because of the image of perfection, we see them and we think, oh, I'm not that way, right? I can never be that way because they're perfect, they're in this perfect box. But, hearing, you now can take 2 weeks to celebrate and, just enjoy the glow of that, but maybe that wasn't the way it was in the past is encouraging because, like myself, I finished that book and I'm just like, okay, I just don't know what to do because it just feels like, I guess that's particularly why I have three fully finished books that I don't know. Like, I don't know if I want to get into the revisions. I'm just like, I guess I'll just keep writing. So at some point they need to get published and I want to publish them, but maybe perhaps I'm not taking the appropriate amount of time to celebrate finishing those.
I think that it is important to focus on that. I think it's equally as important as writing the book because that gives you these positive messages in your future works. Like, yeah, I accomplished that, so I could definitely write another book. Not that you don't already have those messages, but I think it's just nice to be kind to yourself.
Well, I think there's a difference between logically having those messages and then emotionally and mentally having those messages, right? Because logically we can tell ourselves, yes, it would be smart to write the next book. Yes, it would be smart to edit this book, all of these logical things. But then when it gets down to the emotion and the actual mental parts of it, maybe the message isn't as deep as, I mean, I think most of us are very logical. So,
That's it.
uh, something an interesting thing to keep in mind. So, do you have any recommendations for someone who is still learning and perhaps they don't have that positive support from, I'm not saying I'm this way. My wife is very supportive of me, but there may be someone who feel like they're writing in a box. They finish a book or they do something, they accomplish something, but there's not someone there to celebrate with them. What do you
Yeah.
recommend? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah. Well, first off, that makes my heart sad to think of somebody being in that kind of box. I think community is so important because writing is it can be such an isolating activity, whether we do it for just a hobby or like a casual author or as
Hmm.
a full job. It's an isolating activity. So finding that community, even if it's one person that's your writing partner or a relative that is willing to read your work and give you feedback, or just to have that celebration with. Um, I think that's vital to have that foundation as a writer, especially today.
And then you actually have to, okay, I don't want to say this word because it sounds terrible. I was gonna say use that community, but I don't mean like, take not take advantage. What am I trying to say? You have this available resource, this community,
Yeah.
this support group, you know, be grateful for it and share information with them. The reason I say that is, well, this is so funny because I'm so silly, but I am part of this writing group and I feel very supported by this writing group. I've really enjoyed the process. I consider them friends, even though I've never met any of them in person. It's digital. Um, but I literally published 3 books and I just didn't say anything to them. I was like, no, it just feels weird. Like, I don't know. I just have a hard time tooting my own horn, for lack of a better term. And, I sent out my email and one of them was on it. And then they sent to this group chat, why didn't you tell us you published 3 books? Like, that's super exciting. I was like, I didn't really know how to say it. It was just funny. It's just like, if you have that support group, don't be afraid to celebrate with them, right? To
Yeah.
say something so that they can support you and congratulate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Being vulnerable is a piece of like having community, like you were saying, just that willingness to be open. Because if you open that door for yourself, that also means somebody's on the other side of that door who can open up to you.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, do you have any recommendations how to become more vulnerable? Just practice.
Yeah, I think I guess it's a little hard for me to pinpoint because I think I've been vulnerable since like 96 when I was born. It's just something that's built into my personality, I think. But I think that first step is definitely probably the hardest because it does feel so jarring and uncomfortable. But if you remind yourself that most people are probably in the same shoes you are, being nervous or unsure, and just laying out, like, hey, I'm human, you're human, we all have emotions, we all have a past. Let's just be honest with each other.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think if you found the right people,
Mhm.
then that's kind of the point of that relationship, right? Is to
Right.
be there for each other and to celebrate and just uh I think there's also a piece of me that has a hard time remembering. I don't know if it's my ADHD or what, but sometimes I just forget to tell people certain things, and it has nothing to do with I don't trust you or I don't. It's just like I just forgot. Sorry, my brain's going like this. So,
Right. Being vulnerable, admitting that. There you
yeah.
go.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's an interesting experience, but this is a really interesting conversation, particularly for newer authors, because I think at the beginning you're consuming a lot of help stuff, podcasts, reading lots of books, and
Mhm.
it once you really get started, you can't distill that information and find your own truth in terms of your publishing experience. So, when you published your first book in 2016. Do you feel like you knew what you were doing in terms of now I need to find my readers? Did you have a good plan, a good sense of what you needed to do?
Mm. Wow, reaching back to that 2016.
Just a couple of years ago, right?
Honestly, I kind of like self taught myself the self-publishing system because back then, quote unquote, Um, there wasn't really that much of like there wasn't like a TikTok community. Instagram was like, sort of a thing, but in my experience, it was actually very gatekeepy. So it was a lot of like Professor YouTube and a lot of articles of trying to learn what self-publishing is. So I think that I had a handle on it the best of my ability in 2016. And I was more so thriving off of just being a local author, sharing on Facebook. And my book was in a few coffee shops and bookstores in the town that I live in. I would meet up with people who messaged me on Facebook asking to get coffee so they could buy my book. So I had like my own inventory at home, and I kind of would almost like a traveling author or something would go to book coffee shops and meet up with people who wanted to buy it. And I don't know if I really, I think I wanted to eventually write more books, but I was just so proud of myself for writing that first book. I don't know if I was intentionally planning those next steps, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Absolutely does. And I think it's awesome. The whole in-person local feeling is very awesome, particularly when you have a supportive community. Now, I haven't really tried or done much with it. Once again, need to get out of my box a little bit. But, if you look at yourself now compared to 2016, because of the experience that you had in publishing that first book and now publishing a few more books, right? You've learned more, you've gained more knowledge. Um, has your strategy shifted since then in terms of publishing and finding your readers?
Yeah, I would say that it's more so, I still try to have that local piece in there. I work with a awesome like local bookstore in town and a few coffee shops still that like to have local authors and artists in their coffee shops. I think that it's more shifted to social media because that's
Hmm.
unfortunately how we find a lot of, or I should say like unfortunately, and also like it's a bright side of the internet,
Mhm.
finding community. But that's primarily how I think a lot of us find our readers and support group now is through social media, which is uh, a bit heady if you think about it too much, because you're spending a bunch of time on social media when you want to be writing, but you need to be on social media to find your people.
The constant battle of priorities, right? Yeah, I agree. It's kind of the double-edged sword,
Mhm.
social media, because they're being able to reach people further, I mean, across the world is amazing,
Mhm.
at the fingertips. If you find the right people, if you make the right content, you can find them. But boy, can it suck so much time. Can. I say can because it doesn't have to. That's when we get into the self-control funness of being able to rein in the temptation to get sucked. And when it's not a problem, no judgment. But yeah, there's just so much to do. And the
Mhm.
other thing is community creation, while possible, is a little bit trickier via social media because it feels a little bit impersonal, even
Mhm.
though, you're talking on video, sometimes just like, oh, it's you have to project yourself, I think, a little bit more via social
Right.
media, um, so that people
Yeah.
know who you are.
Right. And you're trying to come off as you're trying to be genuine, which you are, but you're also trying to talk to a general audience, which is weird. Yeah, like you said, double-edged sword. That's a good analogy.
And there's also a lot of it. There's
Yeah.
so many platforms, and the question is always, which one should I be on? Because
Hmm.
all isn't necessarily possible. So it sounds like you've enjoyed TikTok. You may have found some success from your community on TikTok. How do you um, deal with the potential comparisonitis of being on TikTok?
Ooh.
Because there's a lot of very successful authors on there, and seeing them be successful can be challenging.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't lie and say I haven't been a victim to the, what did you say? Compare, what was that?
Comparisonitis,
I
the
like that. Yeah, yeah. I definitely have felt that way, even with some of my own like writer friends, because a part of me is so happy for them and rooting for them, and I'm a part of their readership. And another part of me, it's almost like that mirror effect where it's like, well, why isn't that happening for me? Like, what am I doing wrong? My husband is a rock star and helping me off of those cliffs, but it can be hard. Um, I think that I I just try not to be on social media that much, to be honest. I've
Yeah.
gotten a little burned out by it, and it, like you said, it feels a little impersonal sometimes, which is very polarizing for me, being I like to think a very authentic and genuine person. So it feels weird when you're trying to post content that may come off as the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a little lost in my own explanation. I hope that answered your
Oh, it
question.
does. It totally
Okay.
answers the question. And I think it's a very important example
Mhm.
of remembering why we're doing certain things, right?
Yeah.
Because, social media, because of the just the mass of it and the impersonal nature of it, not always, but a lot of the time, sometimes
Mhm.
we forget why we're writing. And, it's in those moments that we need to think, oh, that's right. No, I really enjoy telling stories. I really enjoy entertaining or whatever your reason is for writing. Um,
Yeah.
so what reminders do you have in your life that help you remember the reason that you're writing, the reason you're doing what you're doing?
Oh, I really like that question. I think my whole life I've been a lover of stories and a storyteller in a lot of different mediums. I think it's something that's just a part of like my internal foundation. So I think if I get into a rut or I'm feeling, I don't know, I'm just feeling down or I'm comparing myself, I try to remind myself that I'm a storyteller, and that's it's a beautiful thing to be because the world is kind of built off of stories and we need storytellers in all capacities.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting point there, almost like the building blocks of society.
Yeah.
It's just stories and which is an interesting thing to think about. And if there were no storytellers at all, where would we be today? You don't have to answer that question. Just a rhetorical
we
question. Asking you, what do you think the world will look like today without storytellers?
Whoa.
Your expert opinion. But no, I love that. I think, just remembering that because like you, it's an intrinsic part of myself. It has become a part of me. And I do ironically recognize a difference in myself if there's too long of a period of time where I'm not creating a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Hmm.
do you feel that as well in yourself and in your
Oh
own
yeah.
life?
Yeah, definitely. I know I feel that, and my husband is an artist, so he also feels that way if he's not like,
Cool.
yeah, I know he's amazing. But he feels the same way, so we kind of check each other. We're like, "Have you created lately? Have you created lately?" And it definitely there's a big mood change when you make sure you carve out that time for yourself, even if it's just like rereading a chapter you wrote or giving yourself 15 minutes or writing on Google Docs on your phone before bed. Anything like that can just really help your mood.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I think once you recognize that, then it can. This is why I call myself a casual author, right? Because it's not because I'm treating the whole thing lightly, casually. It's primarily because it has melded with my life, all of my
Mhm.
craziness that goes on, and it has
Like,
become a part of that. And so it's
mhm.
just, casual, meaning I don't let it stress me out. I don't let it consume, because you have a choice. You have these hobbies, you have these interests. Your life can either fight against them or it can work with it. And I like to think that I've reached a point in my life where, when a kid needs a diaper change in the middle of my writing session, that I'm not frustrated and angry. It's just like, yeah, it's part of life, not a big deal. I can come
Right,
back and just meld back into it. It all is just like a symbiotic system. That was a
right.
really scientific term that may or may not be correct, but we're gonna go with it.
I really like that perspective though, and it's kind of like the stream of your life. It's just going into the flow of it. And like you said, whatever comes up, like, yep, I'll take care of that, and then I can go back to this.
It's tricky though. a muscle that
Yeah.
needs to be exercised. But this is a completely off base question only because I'm curious. But does your husband, as an artist, m make art for you in your stories?
So not really. He has like a different journey, like with his art journey, and
Uh,
I'm very proud for what he's done. We were working on doing a children's book. I wrote a children's book, and he was illustrating it. But he kind of recently was like, if you want to pass that baton to somebody else, go for it, because he's more of a casual artist as
yeah.
well. So yeah, but we definitely support each other, and maybe there'll be a collab in our future. Who knows?
I mean, obviously no pressure. I know multiple, ironically, why do I know this? I know multiple author artist pairings. You know,
Mhm.
they are an artist or they're the author and their partner is the artist. And it's just interesting to see the different relationships. My wife, she's very good at art, but she's not an artist. It's not something that she does as a hobby. But I was just curious if he like made character art or did your covers or anything, and she no expectation whatsoever. What style does he, what's his medium, I guess I should say, for art?
He's pretty good at all 2D kind of
Okay.
art. He's primarily focused on more like acrylic based paintings and like
Cool.
self portraits and pet portraits. He finished actually my profile picture on TikTok is the self portrait he did of me this past year, which I was very humbled by. He wanted to paint me.
That was very cool. I did see that, and I was curious to know what the story was. So without even asking, I got the story of it.
There we go.
That's very cool. So for your stories and the collection of ideas and saving, because as authors, I think oftentimes we have lots of stories in our mind. So
Ooh,
for
yeah,
you, how do you prioritize what to write and what to do as an author?
that's a great question. Cause like you said, I've had a lot of stories in my like inner brain file for a long time, and I feel like every day I'm kind of adding little loose leaf paper to those files. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that same concept as well. Um, I think it's another thing that's internalized in me. I'm a very self-disciplined person. I don't know if that's just from like how I grew up. I kind of grew up in a loving but strict household, so I think I've had that self-discipline muscle working for a long time. I think that I have stories I'm really excited about, so I'll use that as incentive. Like, okay, after I finish this, I get to write this and something like that.
I'm so logical, and for some reason, I don't do that.
Said and done, honestly.
But I mean, it works. Seems like it
Yeah,
works, right?
so far.
Keeps the ball rolling. I mean, things could change. We're all still
Yeah.
young. But no,
Mhm.
I'd love that. I love the perspective on that and the idea that, it's just part of life to recognize that certain things need to happen first, whatever they are, before other things can happen. Um, and that self-discipline is also a muscle that needs to be exercised.
I think
But
incentives and rewards for that self-discipline muscle is vital. You
so
definitely
what
need.
is, sorry, continue.
No, 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 that's all. Sorry.
I was going to ask what your favorite reward was.
Sims 4 time.
Hey, no, I love that.
Yeah, I don't let myself play until I feel like okay, I'm either on the verge of burnout or I feel like I've accomplished quite a bit, so I can give myself some playtime.
This may be a naive question because I have played Sims before, but it's been quite a while. I think the last Sims I played was two, maybe.
Okay, good one.
Um, this is so funny. Do you have stories for your families, like, or because it seems like as an author, I would probably like create backstories in my brain, maybe not write them for all the
Yeah,
characters and the family. Do you do that?
maybe to an extent, not
Okay.
like writing storyboards or anything, but I think in my mind when I'm playing, It's really interesting because I grew up as a Barbie kid. I loved
Uh,
my Barbie. I definitely had storylines for my playtime. I would like go and I'd pick up the story right where I left off. And I think transitioning from that into Sims was not a mistake. But yeah, I have like a Sims family I go back to and I'm like building up their lives and stuff. It's just kind of fun to disassociate for a little bit.
yeah, for sure. Do you find that those ever become books? Those little stories you create, or has that not happened yet?
Not really, but it's interesting you say that because when I was in high school, I was playing Sims, and of course, my Sim was a writer because I was projecting. But you can title the books in Sims, and I would just come up with random titles, and I threw one out there, and I ended up really liking the titles. I was like, I'm gonna save that, and it's the book that I'm using as my incentive after I finished writing the locals to go into, and it's called Riding Shotgun with Kara Song, and it's actually a book inside of a book. In my first novel, I've Never Danced, there's a writer character, and he writes a book called Riding Shotgun with Kara Song. So it's a little book inside of a book.
Yeah, that is so fun. I mean, I don't have little Easter eggs like that in any of my books, at least unless my intuitive brain created them and I just don't know about them. But I mean, now how cool. That's so fun that you have that experience, kind of that past thought that you even remember it. I commend you on that. If I my memory's not always great if I don't write things down. Um, but now anybody's reading, if they read I've Never Danced, then now they'll be like, oh, I know
Yeah,
what
they
that
can look
means.
forward
Like I said, Easter
to.
egg. That's so fun. This has been an incredible conversation, and I know that we could probably talk for a very, very long time. There's so many questions that I have in my mind. It's easy to ask them. But given that we are running short on time, where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to check them out?
Right. Well, first, I just want to thank you for inviting me on the show because I've also had a really fun time talking. Time is like flew by. It
It's
feels like
so
it's
fast. Wild.
but thank you for asking. You can find me at BA McRae on TikTok and Instagram. I think that, and on Goodreads. I think that's about it.
Excellent. And I'm sure your books are all over the place. I found them on Barnes and Noble. So
Yes, Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Mhm.
nice. Very good. Well, I'll make sure to add those links to the show notes so people can find them super easily. Well, thank you for your time. This has been so fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. I look forward to talking again in the future and listening to more casual author episodes.
Oh, yes, I'm sure we could definitely do this again easily.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And congratulations again on finishing your book. Make sure to celebrate.
Thank you. I'll try to take a moment for that. Congrats on finishing yours as well, I should say.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Speaking with B.A. McRae was just enlightening. It was very friendly, and I just love the positive aspects of it. Now, have I since then learned to celebrate more? Not quite. Still working on that. But it's something to keep in mind when it comes to, once again, giving your brain, your mind allowances to recapture that creative energy and not expel it without taking some time to recuperate and to celebrate your successes. So hopefully you learned from that. Next week, we are talking to Waterfall Adams about poetry, passion, and multi-threaded publishing. So Waterfall has a lot of experience with multi-threaded publishing and has a lot of passions in very fascinating places that I've never considered. The great thing about creatives is we often have interests and knowledge in a lot of different areas. And so we talk about that. Waterfall and I have a wonderful conversation. I think you will enjoy that. Now, once again, if you'd like to join me on the podcast, you can head to thecasualauthor.com and fill out the pitch form there. I'd love to hear about you and what experiences you have related to publishing. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'd love it if you would subscribe, share this podcast with your friends, or I believe you can follow the podcast on any of your podcast platforms. Hopefully, we can share the knowledge and the news and just the positivity around publishing because there's a lot of negativity around it, but I think it's a great time to publish, and hopefully you are feeling that as well as an author. But thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you next week.